So now I'm going to teach you how to do spirals. Now I will say that although I could just simply use these round nose pliers, when we come to turning, I'll show you that part in a moment, it can leave a dent, so I would suggest using a pair of round nose and a pair of nylon coated. Now a lot of people make the mistake when they're first making that they do this the same as what we've done previously for our eye loops, and if you can see it's actually flat there. Now if you want a nice coil, a great tip is to actually go back in and cut this straight line. Cut that off, and then to coil it as tight as you can. Okay, and then we keep going. Now you can keep going with your round nose pliers, but personally I would go back in with my nylon coated. Now you can do this as tight or as loose as you want. So I'm doing quite a tight one here, but say I wanted it a bit looser, I'd probably coil like this. Or, as I showed you previously with the S-clasp, you could actually move the wire itself around. Hold it again, move the wire. So then we get a much looser coil. And you can get to the point where you can literally just do it with your fingers. It depends how perfect you want it, how round. Okay. And I'll continue doing a more perfect one here because I prefer them to be a little bit tighter. I think it just looks nicer. I think it shows that you know what you're doing. So I like to get right in there, make a tight coil, cut, and I always cut with the flush side, again for the fact that we don't want that little jagged edge. Now I'm going to do it just with these pliers, and I'll be able to show you what I mean about leaving little marks onto the wire itself. Now I try to actually, when I'm doing this, use the pliers and actually, because you get a little gap, I try and actually move the wire through that as I'm bending it. It helps to make sure I'm not distorting it in any way. And as you can see, this coil is actually a lot tighter than the previous one. You can get spiral making tools that I've mentioned earlier, and I'll show you how to use that in a moment. But for the fact that this is really simple, very cute and effective, and you want to get it as tight, especially for bracelets. Now I don't know if you can see, but I've actually started to mark it now with particularly cheaper wires and pliers that have more I don't know if you can see that they're not smooth. They've got this sort of friction on them so that you can actually grab the wire. They would actually take that enamel off. That's something that you have to be careful of. Now, I'm not too fussed about these marks simply because I'll be hammering, which leave the marks anyway, and as long as I haven't took any of the enamel off, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so I'm just going to go to here. The reason why I'm not going right to the end is because I want to hammer this in place. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, again, because it won't matter about those little marks on it. But secondly, because no matter how tight we do this, this little bit here still has a gap. And I can run my fingers over that and it's not going to get caught on my skin. But as I learnt to personal detriment, I made some jewellery for my mother's wedding, and my grandmother, her mother, actually went to hug her wearing a lace dress. Now, obviously, we can't get in there, but lace could, and it pulled it out, and that was very mortifying. So that's just something to be aware of, that just because you can't pull it doesn't mean a fabric can't. And obviously, if you're making these, particularly if you're selling them, you really don't want that happening. So we're going to get the hammer. I mean, I've already showed you hammering. Now I'm going to be careful not to hammer this bit here, because I don't want to harden this wire, because I'm going to continue with my coiling. So I'd actually put my finger here. Let's see if I can move it so it's a bit clearer on camera. Yep, so I put my finger here, so I'm not going to hit that. I'm really aiming for that centre part of the coil. Now, especially if you're doing looser coils like this one here, this was one of the coils that I did on the bracelet in question, and I didn't really understand hammering at that point. I thought it would take the enamel off the wire, and obviously if you do too much it will, but in general it doesn't, as you've seen several times now. So there's a top tip, learn from my silly little mistakes. Fortunately, by that point in the day it wasn't so much of an issue because alcohol was already flowing. But had it been prior to the actual wedding, that would have been very, very embarrassing. So for this one. Oh, and of course, if you are going to bend them anymore, make sure you've made any adjustments. Obviously here we've got bits that are coming out, and that doesn't bother me any. I've actually made roses using that exact shape before, because the little bits of distortion look like petals. So if I was actually going to, obviously I can't do that now because I started hammering it. I'll show you that in a second. Again, hammer both sides and only hammer the bits that you don't want to continue twisting. I'm just going to move that over here. Okay, so we've got our two coils, and as you can see they're very different, and because of that hammering those little marks don't really matter anymore because it just looks like part of the effect. And I'll show you how we can do a coil like this, but specifically to make it look like a rose. Now move this out of the background, move this to the front. Now because I want that slightly odd shape with straight lines, I wouldn't actually cut the spiral like I did the first time, and I'd actually make it a bit bigger in the middle. So I'd start like that. Exactly the same as we've done an eye pin, whereas I'd go like that. We're not going to, we're just going to continue. Okay, and if you can see there, we're already getting more of an oval shape. Now I personally prefer to do this like that, because we're making the shape a little bit different. Now I go in with my hands, because without intentionally doing it you end up making these sort of off coils. So I'd pull that in, and then I'd come back here and I'd grip it at the bottom again. And as you can see, we're making these strange sort of awkward turns, I call them. They're not quite a proper turn, they're just a bit quirky. Okay, I'll just pull that wire out a bit more. And obviously the more you build it up, the more it looks like that. And I like that effect if I'm doing something particularly with a lot of petals on, because it then looks a lot more like a rose.